When a homeless man approached Ivanka Trump asking for just $1, no one could have imagined what would happen next. What started as a simple act of kindness turned into something far bigger, a movement that touched hearts, reunited a shattered family and changed lives forever. The city pulsed with its usual rhythm, car horns blaring, hurried footsteps echoing against the pavement, and muffled conversations blending into the background. On the corner of Broad Street and 17th Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, a man sat hunched against the worn-out brick wall of an old convenience store. His clothes were tattered, layered haphazardly to fight off the biting chill of winter. Beside him, a cardboard sign read in faded ink, "Anything helps. God bless." His name was Leonard, though most people never bothered to ask. At 42, life had been merciless, stripping him of everything he once held dear. Nearly a year on the streets had taught him one thing: survival was a gamble. Some days a kind stranger would drop a few coins into his lap. Other times people walked past, eyes fixed ahead, pretending not to see him. Pulling his thin beanie down over his ears, Leonard shivered, watching shoes of every kind pass him. High heels, sneakers, polished loafers. Then, something unusual caught his eye. A pair of pristine white sneakers came to a stop just a few feet away from him. These weren't ordinary shoes. They were the kind that only someone privileged, someone untouched by hardship, would wear. His curiosity piqued. Leonard glanced up. Standing there was a woman, tall, graceful, yet entirely composed. Her hands were tucked casually into the pockets of an elegant coat, her golden hair catching the city's dull winter light. Leonard squinted, trying to place her face. He had seen it before, somewhere. She was waiting at the corner, scrolling through her phone, oblivious to the attention she was drawing. Around them, whispers spread like wildfire. Some onlookers discreetly raised their phones, capturing the moment in secret. Leonard hesitated. He never approached anyone unless they made eye contact first, but there was something different about her. Unlike everyone else rushing past, she stood still, watching, observing, yet radiating a quiet calmness that felt strangely out of place in the city's chaos. Taking a breath, Leonard forced a small, uncertain smile. "Hey, miss," he called, his voice hoarse from the cold. "Could you spare $1?" The woman froze mid-scroll. Slowly, she tilted her head as if making sure she had heard him right. Then, gracefully, she turned to face him. Her expression was unreadable. For a brief moment, time itself seemed to slow. The noise of the city dulled. The background faded. Leonard braced himself for rejection. He was used to it. But what happened next was anything but ordinary. "What do you need it for?" she asked, her voice steady, yet impossibly gentle. The question caught Leonard off guard. It wasn't dismissive, nor was it laced with judgment. Instead, there was something in her tone, something genuine. He swallowed hard. "Well," he rubbed his hands together, his fingers stiff from the cold. "A cup of coffee would be nice. Maybe a sandwich if I'm lucky." His voice faltered. There was something unsettling about being questioned. But there was no malice in her words, only curiosity. She took a step closer, slipping her phone into her pocket, fully present now. Leonard could feel the stares of passers-by, the silent judgment in their eyes. Why is a woman like her even talking to a man like him? For a split second, he wanted to shrink back, to disappear before the embarrassment settled in, but her gaze held him there. "What's your name?" she asked. His throat tightened. "Leonard." His voice barely carried over the wind. She nodded slightly, her brow furrowing, not in discomfort, but in thought, as if she were piecing together something far bigger than this moment. Then she spoke. "I'm Ivanka." No arrogance, no sense of self-importance, just a quiet, unexpected sincerity. The city's hum returned, but something about that moment had already changed everything. The air between them felt charged, as if this brief moment was leading to something far greater. Leonard shifted uneasily on the cold pavement, unsure of how to respond. Ivanka's presence was unlike anything he had encountered before. Most people either ignored him, averted their gaze, or tossed some loose change his way without a second thought. But she wasn't just stopping. She was actually talking to him, treating him like an equal. Then, to his surprise, Ivanka crouched down to meet him at eye level. The unexpected gesture caught Leonard off guard. No one had ever done that before. "How long have you been out here?" she asked, her tone calm but direct. Leonard hesitated. Sharing his story wasn't something he usually did. People didn't care about the why, only the spectacle of his misfortune. But there was something different about Ivanka's demeanor. It was disarming, almost as if she genuinely wanted to know. "Almost a year now," Leonard admitted, his voice quiet. "Lost my job after the plant shut down. Then my health took a turn. I couldn't keep up with rent." He paused, swallowing the lump in his throat. "It's been downhill ever since." Ivanka listened intently, her eyes narrowing slightly, not in judgment but in focus. It was a look Leonard wasn't used to, a mix of curiosity and concern, like she was piecing together a puzzle in her mind. Leonard also noticed the quiet tension growing among the onlookers. People were watching, whispering. Some even stopped in their tracks, their curiosity piqued by the unusual sight of Ivanka Trump, crouched on the sidewalk beside a homeless man. "What about family?" she asked after a beat. Leonard's jaw tightened. He shook his head. "Don't have much of that anymore. My folks passed years ago. My brother, well, we haven't talked in ages." He let out a bitter chuckle. "Not much left. To lose when you've already lost it all." Ivanka was quiet for a moment, as if carefully considering his words. Then, without breaking eye contact, she reached into her pocket. Leonard's pulse quickened. He had asked for a single dollar. Just one, but Ivanka's movement suggested something different. When her hand emerged, she wasn't holding a single bill. Instead, between her fingers was a crisp $100 note. Leonard blinked in disbelief. "Here," Ivanka said, extending the bill toward him. "This should cover more than just coffee." Leonard stared at the money, stunned. For a moment, he couldn't move. It wasn't just about the amount, it was the gesture itself. "Are you serious?" he finally managed to ask, his voice cracking. "Why would you do that?" Ivanka shrugged lightly. "Because I can." The simplicity of her answer left Leonard speechless, but before he could respond, Ivanka leaned in slightly, her voice dropping to a softer tone. "But listen," she added, "this isn't just about the money. I want you to promise me something." Leonard tightened his grip around the bill as if it might vanish. "What's that?" he asked hesitantly. Ivanka's expression shifted, becoming more serious. "If I help you today, you have to help yourself tomorrow. Deal?" Leonard felt a lump rise in his throat. The words hit harder than he expected. For the first time in what felt like forever, someone wasn't just handing him a lifeline. They were challenging him to climb out of the hole he had fallen into. Leonard swallowed hard, then gave a small nod. "Good," Ivanka said, standing back up. She glanced around at the growing crowd, unbothered by the attention. Leonard, on the other hand, felt his cheeks burn as he noticed people pulling out their phones, recording the entire exchange. He wasn't sure how to feel, grateful, embarrassed, or both. Ivanka reached into her pocket again, pulling out a small notepad and pen. Without hesitation, she scribbled something down, tore off a piece of paper, and handed it to Leonard. "Go to this address tomorrow morning," she said firmly. "They'll help you. Tell them Ivanka sent you." Leonard unfolded the note, his hands trembling slightly. It was the address of a local shelter and resource center, one he had heard of before but had always been too proud or too ashamed to visit. "I'll make sure they're expecting you," Ivanka added, her voice steady. The air around them felt different. Now, as if something had shifted, Leonard clutched the paper and the money tightly. This wasn't just kindness, it was hope, a fragile, flickering light in a world that had been dark for far too long, and somehow he knew this was only the beginning. Leonard sat there, staring at the $100 bill and the note in his hands as if they were foreign objects. His mind raced, caught between disbelief and cautious hope. Ivanka didn't leave immediately. Instead, she stood there, watching him with an intensity that felt almost unnerving. It was clear. She wasn't just offering a handout. She was waiting for something. Maybe an acknowledgement, maybe a commitment. Leonard cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "Why?" he asked, barely above a whisper. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." Ivanka tilted her head slightly, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Because everyone has a story, Leonard." She paused, glancing at the crowd that had begun to gather. "And honestly, if I'm in a position to do something good, why wouldn't I?" Leonard was taken aback. He had heard plenty of empty words over the years, but there was something in her tone, something solid, something real. Still, skepticism gnawed at him. "You don't owe me anything," he said, his voice firmer now. "I've been out here long enough to know people don't just stop to help without expecting something in return." Ivanka crouched down again, meeting his gaze with unwavering confidence. "I don't expect anything, but I do believe that small actions can lead to something bigger." She gestured toward the note in his hand. "That place? They've got resources, job programs, counseling, whatever you might need. All I'm asking is that you show up." Leonard swallowed hard, his throat tightening. He glanced at the note again, at the address scribbled in neat handwriting. He wanted to believe this was real, but years of disappointment had left him hardened. "And what if I can't do it?" he asked quietly. "What if I screw it up?" Ivanka's smile was faint but steady. She shook her head. "Everyone screws up, Leonard. But giving up?" She paused, letting the words settle. "That's the only way you lose." Her words were simple, but they hit with a force Leonard wasn't prepared for. For a moment, the noise of the city faded away, and all he could hear was the quiet conviction in her voice. The crowd around them had grown thicker now. Phones were out. Openly recording, someone murmured, "Is that Ivanka Trump?" Leonard glanced nervously at the growing attention. He wasn't used to being in the spotlight, and the weight of so many eyes on him felt suffocating. Ivanka, however, seemed unfazed. If anything, she thrived under the pressure, her calm confidence standing in sharp contrast to Leonard's unease. "Ignore them," she said softly, as if reading his mind. "This is about you and me right now. No one else matters." A strange sense of relief washed over Leonard. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel invisible. Someone saw him, really saw him, and cared enough to listen. He exhaled slowly, then nodded. "All right," he said finally, his voice steady. "I'll go. I'll show up." Ivanka's expression softened, a genuine smile breaking through. "That's all I wanted to hear." She stood up, brushing off her knees before glancing at the crowd. Then, her voice rang out louder, as if speaking to everyone at once. "And Leonard?" He looked up. "You've got more strength in you than you realize, don't forget that." Leonard blinked, overwhelmed by a mix of gratitude and embarrassment. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. So instead, he simply nodded, gripping the note like a lifeline. Ivanka turned to leave, and as she moved through the crowd, they parted for her. Their whispers grew louder. Leonard watched as she disappeared into the city, her figure blending into the steady flow of people, and for the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something he thought he had lost: hope. He looked down at the note once more. This was the first step toward reclaiming his life. The next morning, Leonard stood outside the address Ivanka had given him. It was a modest brick, building on a quieter side of Cleveland, its entrance marked with a simple sign, Hope Outreach Resource Center. A small stream of people filtered in and out, some carrying grocery bags, others looking just as uncertain as Leonard felt. He clutched the note in his pocket, his fingers tracing the edges, as if to remind himself that this wasn't a dream. The $100 bill was still tucked safely in his jacket. Part of him wanted to hold on to it, to keep it as proof that yesterday had really happened, but another part of him, the part that Ivanka's words had awakened, whispered that this wasn't just about the money, it was about the chance to start over. Taking a deep breath, Leonard stepped inside. The warmth of the building enveloped him immediately, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. A receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a welcoming smile, looked up from her desk. "How can I help you today, Ivanka?" Trump hesitated before pulling out the note and sliding it across the counter. Barron sent me. He said I should come here." The woman's eyes flicked to the paper, and a knowing smile spread across her face. "Ah, you must be Ivanka. We've been expecting you." She stood up and motioned for her to follow. "Come on, let's get you started." The next few hours passed in a blur. Ivanka met with a caseworker who listened to her story without judgment, outlining a plan to help her get back on her feet. They arranged a temporary bed for her at the shelter, scheduled a doctor's appointment to address her health concerns, and even connected her with a job training program. It was overwhelming, but for the first time in years, Ivanka felt like the broken pieces of her life were finally being put back together. That evening, as she sat on the edge of her cot in the shelter, Ivanka replayed the events of the past 24 hours in her mind. The kindness of a stranger, the unexpected offer of help, the simple act of being seen. It all felt surreal. She thought about Barron's words, about the promise she had made to help herself. It wasn't going to be easy, but for the first time, she truly believed it was possible. Meanwhile, outside the shelter, Barron's small act of generosity had started a ripple effect beyond anything either of them could have imagined. A bystander had recorded their interaction, and the video had gone viral overnight, spreading across social media like wildfire. Headlines praised the young Trump heir's unexpected act of kindness. The footage showed Barron kneeling beside Ivanka, handing her the money, and offering words of encouragement that resonated with millions. Some called it a publicity stunt, while others saw it as a rare display of genuine compassion from someone in a position of privilege. Regardless of the debates, one thing was certain: the video had captured something raw and powerful. People from all walks of life began reaching out to Hope Outreach Resource Center, offering donations and support, inspired by Barron's actions. Ivanka had no idea that her story had become a national conversation. She was too focused on the steps ahead, attending her first counseling session, filling out job applications, and learning to believe in herself again. As she lay down that night, the weight of the past years felt a little lighter. Somewhere out there, the young man who had stopped to help her was making waves, but Ivanka's focus remained simple: take it one day at a time, and honor the promise she had made. By the end of the week, Ivanka began noticing subtle changes, both within herself and in the world around her. The shelter staff treated her with a kindness she hadn't experienced in years. They didn't just offer practical support, they reminded her that her story wasn't over yet. Word of her journey spread quietly within the shelter. Others who had been struggling in silence started coming up to her, inspired by her courage to take the first step. "If you can do it, maybe I can too," one man said, patting her on the back. The simple gesture filled Ivanka with an unfamiliar sense of pride. Outside the shelter, however, her story was no longer quiet. The video of her Interaction with Barron had exploded across social media, amassing millions of views in just a few days. News outlets picked up the story, analyzing every detail. Commentators debated whether Barron's actions were genuine or performative, while viewers across the country shared their thoughts online. Privilege with a purpose. One tweet read, "This is how you use it for good." Another user posted, "It's sad that kindness like this is so rare that it shocks us, but kudos to Barron for showing us it's possible." Ivanka only found out about the video when a shelter staff member showed it to her. Watching herself on the screen, she felt a strange mix of emotions: embarrassment, gratitude, and something she couldn't quite define. She barely recognized the woman in the video, the hollow eyes, the defeated posture. It was a stark reminder of how far she had fallen, and maybe how far she could rise. Meanwhile, Barron remained silent about the growing buzz. He refused interviews, avoided public statements, and ignored the online frenzy. To him, this was never about fame. It was about Ivanka. Behind the scenes, Barron quietly ensured that the shelter received substantial donations, enough to expand its programs and help even more people in need. The video sparked a larger movement. People across the country began sharing their own acts of kindness, tagging them with hashtags like Twan's Kindness Challenge and Pay It Forward. Local organizations reported surges in donations, and volunteers stepped forward in droves, inspired by the simplicity of Barron's gesture. For Ivanka, the ripple effect became personal. One evening, as she sat in the shelter's common room, a man approached her with a hesitant look. "Ivanka?" he asked cautiously. She squinted, trying to recognize him. Then it clicked. "Paul?" Her voice trembled. It was her younger brother, the one she hadn't spoken to in over a decade. They stared at each other, the weight of lost years hanging between them. "I saw the video," Paul admitted, sitting beside her. I didn't know things had gotten so bad for you. I should have reached out sooner." Ivanka shook her head, fighting back tears. "It's not your fault. I didn't exactly make it easy for anyone to find me." Paul placed a hand on her shoulder. "Well, I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Their reunion was bittersweet, a reminder of what had been lost, but also of what could still be rebuilt. For Ivanka, it was another step toward healing. Not just her circumstances, but her relationships and her sense of self. As the weeks passed, Ivanka began to see her story not as a tragedy, but as a testament to resilience. And though she still had a long road ahead, she carried with her a renewed sense of purpose, fueled by the kindness of a stranger who had given her more than just money. He had given her hope.